The stated objective of Operation Epic Fury was regime change. On March 8, 2026, day 9 of active strikes on Tehran, Iran named a new supreme leader, under bombardment, under the explicit Israeli threat to target any successor, under Trump's public declaration that the selection was unacceptable and that he personally expected to be involved in the appointment. The appointment happened anyway. The detail that changes the entire analytical framework is not who was selected. It is how. The IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, conducted in-person meetings and repeated phone calls with members of Iran's Assembly of Experts in the days before March 8th, according to Iran International. They applied sustained institutional pressure until a result was produced. The body that, for 47 years, answered to the supreme leader just selected its own superior. That is not a succession. That is a structural inversion of the Islamic Republic's entire command architecture. The question this video answers is not who Mojtaba Khamenei is. The question is what his selection reveals about which institution now controls Iran, and what that institution has spent 40 years building toward. On March 9th, oil prices surged to levels not seen in years, according to the Associated Press, in direct response to the appointment and the Iranian strikes that followed. Brent crude had already reached $115 per barrel in the operation's opening days. Qatar's Energy Minister Saad al-Kaabi warned on March 7th that Gulf region exports could halt entirely within weeks if the current operational tempo continues. Shipping underwriters have not repriced risk. They have exited the market entirely, suspending coverage for Strait of Hormuz transit. When underwriters exit rather than reprice, that is a structural signal, not transient disruption, a fundamental reassessment of route viability. But that is not the real pressure point. The real pressure point is the legitimacy architecture. Mojtaba Khamenei holds the rank of Hojjatul Islam, a mid-level clerical title. Not an ayatollah. Iranian constitutional structure requires the supreme leader to hold senior clerical credentials. In 1989, when Ali Khamenei replaced Ayatollah Khomeini, he also lacked the required rank. The solution was to amend the constitution. That same procedural workaround is now being applied again, under active bombardment, in a compressed timeline, with no public deliberation. The Islamic Republic is rewriting its own constitutional rules in real time, under fire, to produce a predetermined outcome. This is a point that rarely gets enough attention. In January 2026, 6 weeks before the operation launched, Bloomberg published an investigation documenting Mojtaba Khamenei's connection to an offshore financial network. High-value real estate in London and Dubai, structured through intermediaries across multiple jurisdictions. The U.S. Treasury had already sanctioned him in 2019. His financial exposure to Western pressure was mapped before he was selected. He was selected anyway. That is not the decision of an institution that expects to negotiate. The Revolutionary Guard Corps was established in 1979 as a counterweight to the regular Iranian military, considered politically unreliable after the revolution, constitutionally subordinate to the supreme leader from the start. It took orders. It did not give them. After the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, IRGC commanders emerged as battle-hardened institutional survivors, with their own patronage networks and their own economic holdings. By the early 2000s, the IRGC controlled significant portions of the Iranian economy, construction, telecommunications, energy infrastructure, giving it a financial base independent of state allocations. By 2009, during the Green Movement protests, IRGC-affiliated Basij forces executed the crackdown on civilian demonstrators. Mojtaba Khamenei coordinated elements of that operation. His relationship with the IRGC's internal hierarchy solidified precisely during that period. The historical parallel that applies most precisely here is not Iranian. After Stalin's death in 1953, Soviet succession was formally managed by the Politburo, a constitutional body with established standing. In practice, each subsequent general secretary was shaped by which faction had cultivated the deepest patronage networks. By 1982, when former KGB chief Yuri Andropov became general secretary, the security apparatus had captured the selection mechanism. The institution nominally chose the leader. The security services actually did. Iran has just completed an equivalent transition. The Assembly of Experts is the Politburo in this parallel. The IRGC is the KGB. When external pressure on a system is severe enough, the faction with the most internal coercive capacity consolidates control, wraps it in constitutional procedure, and presents it as continuity. Here is where the analysis becomes more complex. There is a second parallel, closer geographically, more directly instructive. In 2003, Washington anticipated that removing Iraq's leadership apex would produce systemic state collapse. Instead, the disbanded officer class reconstituted laterally into networks that proved more durable than the formal state had ever been. The lesson: destroying a leadership structure does not dissolve the institutional networks beneath it. It frequently hardens them. That lesson is now being tested again. against a far more coherent and financially sophisticated actor than post-2003 Iraq ever was. On March 7th, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian delivered a televised address apologizing to neighboring Gulf states for Iranian strikes on their territory. He stated the IRGC had acted on their own authority because the command structure had been disrupted by the loss of senior leadership. He pledged Iran would not strike neighboring countries unless those countries became active launch platforms. Within hours, Dubai International Airport was struck by an Iranian drone. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain reported fresh inbound fire. An IRGC official statement circulated the same day. President Pezeshkian made a mistake. Our forces demonstrated his mistake. Ignore Pezeshkian's words during the war. Pezeshkian's authority as a member of the Interim Leadership Council was publicly overruled by the IRGC in real time. 24 hours later, the IRGC's preferred candidate was installed as supreme leader. Pezeshkian then congratulated the appointment. That sequence maps with precision who holds institutional authority in Iran at this moment. What most coverage misses entirely is this. The geographic scope of this operation has extended well beyond its anticipated boundaries. According to the diplomat's March 5th analysis, a U.S. submarine struck and sank the Iris Dana, Iran's most modern Mauj-class frigate, approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Sri Lanka on March 4th. That engagement occurred in the Indian Ocean. NATO air defense systems in the eastern Mediterranean destroyed a ballistic missile transiting toward Turkish territory, with debris falling in Hatay province. Turkey conveyed a formal diplomatic protest to Tehran. Iran has now struck targets in 12 countries, according to CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper on March 5th. Regime change has collided with an observable reality. The regime produced a successor. Trump, on March 9th, stated Mojtaba Khamenei would require approval from us to remain in power. Senator Lindsey Graham stated it was just a matter of time before he meets the same fate as his father. Israel has already listed him as a target. The deeper constraint lies elsewhere. Congressional opposition, Republican Representative Thomas Massie and Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, who introduced a war powers resolution this week, is structurally different from prior partisan conflicts. The constitutional argument is bipartisan. A forced vote creates a binary trap: defy Congress and trigger a constitutional crisis, or comply and concede operational momentum. Iran is not behaving as a unitary actor. Pezeshkian represents the civilian pragmatist line. The IRGC holds the hardline military line. The competition is now institutionally resolved. Any diplomatic framework engaging the civilian leadership as primary interlocutor is engaging the wrong power center. Unexpected connection. The administration approved a $151 million arms sale to Israel on March 7th, the same day it publicly signaled diplomatic openness. Arms procurement decisions of that scale are not made in 72-hour windows. The simultaneity suggests parallel tracks that are not coordinated, which is itself a structural signal about executive decision-making coherence. Beijing publicly opposed targeting the new supreme leader on March 9th, not a humanitarian position. A sovereignty protection doctrine applied consistently. The same argument deployed regarding Taiwan, regarding Hong Kong. China is building the normative architecture of a counter-framework, to be cited in future contexts where its own interests require identical protection. Putin's unwavering support statement on March 9th is coordinated counterpositioning. Russia cannot provide direct military assistance. What it provides is intelligent support and normative reinforcement at the UN level. The Washington Post reported on March 6th that Russia had already been providing Iran with intelligence support during the operation's first week. Russia's value to Iran in this conflict is informational and institutional, not kinetic. 7 NATO allies issued a formal diplomatic rebuke, structured condemnation, not token concern. The missile interception near Turkish territory has created a specific legal question Ankara cannot ignore. European energy exposure to Hormuz disruption compounds ongoing Russian gas supply constraints from the Ukraine conflict. Two simultaneous commodity shocks interact with ECB rate normalization pressure in ways European monetary policy was not designed to absorb. Here is the analytical reveal that reframes the entire operation. For 10 days, the dominant Western framework has been suppression and attrition. Degrade launch capacity. Sever command structure, create enough institutional pressure to produce collapse or capitulation. That framework assumes the leadership layer and the operational layer of the IRGC are interdependent, that removing the top disrupts the bottom. March 8th demonstrated that assumption is wrong. The IRGC did not lose coherence when its command apex was eliminated. It produced a new one, from within, on its own timeline, while managing a retaliatory campaign across 12 countries. The distributed financial architecture, the embedded economic holdings, the patronage networks within the clerical establishment, these proved capable of executing a constitutional succession procedure under direct external pressure. That is not the behavior of an institution approaching collapse. That is the behavior of an institution that spent 40 years building specifically for this stress test. Full Hormuz closure would drive oil toward $130 per barrel. Standard economic modeling projects, gasoline at $6 per gallon in the United States, recession conditions in Germany and France, and a domestic political cost to the Trump administration that interacts directly with the congressional war powers, challenge already forming. These pressures compound rather than run independently. The sanctions architecture has reached its structural ceiling. Russian and Chinese counter-sanctions diplomacy is building a parallel transactional ecosystem that does not route through dollar-denominated clearing. That experience does not degrade when the conflict ends. It persists. A CSIS panelist stated explicitly on March 5th that current U.S. procurement numbers for SM-3 interceptors and Tomahawks are nowhere near enough, given the first week is consumption rate. Interceptor magazine depth is a structural defense industrial constraint requiring years, not months, to resolve. A hardline supreme leader recalibrating Iran's operational timeline upward is the worst possible counterpart for that constraint environment. 3 scenarios, no predictions, conditions only. Low probability, negotiated framework within 30 days. This requires Mojtaba Khamenei overriding IRGC hardline pressure to authorize back-channel engagement. It requires Trump accepting a settlement short of unconditional surrender. It requires Congress not forcing a war powers vote. Every one of those conditions is currently moving in the wrong direction. Medium probability, operational plateau with managed escalation ceiling. Current tempo continues for 6 to 8 weeks. Iran maintains dual-track posture, diplomatic signals through Pezeshkian, operational continuity through IRGC command. The strait remains contested but not fully closed. No ground incursion, no resolution. Prolonged attrition with periodic escalation spikes. High probability, path of least resistance if current trends persist. The IRGC's institutional capture of the succession mechanism becomes the permanent post-conflict architecture. The pre-war assumption that maximum pressure produces capitulation has been empirically tested. It produced a harder institutional outcome than the one it targeted. The open question this sets up for the next video. Mojtaba Khamenei now controls Iran's armed forces and any decision on its enrichment program. His father maintained strategic ambiguity on nuclear capability as a negotiating instrument, never crossing the threshold, always implying the option. The new supreme leader has personal, structural, and ideological reasons to reconsider that calculus. Iran still holds stocks of highly enriched uranium sitting at a short technical distance from weapons-grade concentration. The question is not whether he wants a deterrent capability. The question is whether the conditions the United States has now created make pursuing one strategically rational, and whether any architecture exists to prevent that outcome. If he concludes the answer is yes, watch 3 indicators. First, whether Mojtaba Khamenei makes any public appearance in the next 2 weeks. His continued absence signals the IRGC is managing succession stability. Second, the pace of Iranian salvos. Fewer than 30 launches per day would indicate meaningful degradation of strike capacity. Third, whether any Gulf state shifts from defensive intercepts to active offensive operations. The moment a GCC member conducts strikes, not interceptions, but strikes, the conflict's structure changes in ways no current diplomatic framework is designed to manage. Those 3 indicators will tell you more about where this is going than any official statement from Washington or Tehran.